Everyone in Red Creek County, Wyoming Territory, believed that Ethan Walker would never marry. It was not just a rumor. It was something people accepted as fact, the same way they accepted that winter snow would cover the hills or that cattle would always follow fresh grass. For 8 long years, no one had seen him smile at a woman, let alone show interest in one. The old ranchers talked about it over coffee. The storekeeper repeated the story to every traveler who stopped in town. Even children had grown up hearing that Ethan Walker was a man who had buried his heart long before he buried anyone else. He never argued about it. He never denied it. He simply worked from sunrise until darkness settled over the Wyoming plains and let people believe whatever they wished. If anyone asked why a man of 34 still lived alone on one of the finest cattle ranches in the territory, he answered with a short nod before walking away. After enough years, people stopped asking. His ranch, known as Silver Rock Ranch, stretched across more than 2,000 acres beside the winding Sweetwater River. Nearly 1,500 longhorn cattle grazed across the rolling fields, and buyers came from Cheyenne every autumn because Ethan's herd had earned one of the strongest reputations in the territory. He employed 3 dependable ranch hands, an aging cook named Walter, whose left arm carried the scars of an old blacksmith accident, and a loyal cattle dog called Scout that rarely left his side. The ranch was successful, the cattle were healthy, the fences stood straight, everything in Ethan's life appeared exactly as it should. Everything except the silence. The house that overlooked the river had been built for a family. The dining table could seat 10 people. Upstairs were empty bedrooms that had never welcomed children. Every evening, only one lamp burned in the front window, and only one man sat beside it reading old ranch ledgers before turning in for the night. Years earlier, there had been another future waiting for him. He had once planned to marry a woman named Caroline, who had come west from Boston filled with dreams about adventure. She stayed long enough to discover that ranch life demanded more than beautiful sunsets and open skies. The long winters, endless work, and lonely distance from city life slowly changed her mind. One cold spring morning, she boarded the eastbound train and never returned. Ethan watched the train disappear without calling her name. He never blamed her. He simply decided that love belonged to other people. From that day forward, he poured every ounce of himself into the ranch. His neighbors respected him. His workers trusted him. Buyers admired his honesty. But nobody truly knew him anymore. That was exactly how he preferred it. Then one warm April morning in 1884, someone rode across his southern pasture and shattered 8 years of carefully protected peace. Her name was Abigail Carter. Most people called her Abby. She was 28 years old and owned Carter Ridge Ranch, nearly 1,200 acres bordering the southern edge of Silver Rock Ranch. 3 years earlier, she had inherited the property after her father passed away from pneumonia during one of the hardest winters Wyoming had seen in decades. Many people expected the ranch to fail. Instead, Abby surprised everyone. She learned every part of the business herself. She branded cattle, repaired wagons, balanced ranch books, negotiated prices, and spent long nights studying land agreements that most ranchers never bothered reading. 2 loyal workers remained with her after her father's death. One was a young cowboy named Mason. The other was an older ranch hand everyone simply called Hank, who had helped raise Abby since she was a little girl. She never asked anyone to rescue her. She simply worked harder than everyone expected. She was not tall, but she carried herself with quiet confidence. Her chestnut hair stayed tied behind her shoulders while she worked, and her sharp hazel eyes missed very little. People often whispered that she behaved more like a ranch owner than most men in the county. She paid little attention to gossip. The trouble between Abby and Ethan began with something simple. A fence. Years before, Ethan's father and Abby's father had agreed that the long fence dividing their ranches would always be maintained by the Walker family. Nothing had ever been written down because neighbors trusted one another back then. After both fathers passed away, the agreement faded with them. Months earlier, several sections of that fence had broken apart during heavy winter storms. Ethan's cattle wandered freely onto Abby's southern grazing fields, eating fresh spring grass she had carefully saved for her own herd. Even worse, two of Ethan's breeding bulls crossed onto her land and mixed with cattle she was not yet ready to breed. Abby sent one letter. No answer. She sent another. Still nothing. She even asked Hank to speak with one of Ethan's ranch hands. Nothing changed. By the third week of April, she had reached the end of her patience. Early Wednesday morning, she saddled her bay mare, Willow, tied her hat beneath her chin against the cool prairie wind, and pointed the horse toward Silver Rock Ranch. Back at Carter Ridge, Mason watched her disappear over the hill. "You sure you don't want company?" he asked. Abby shook her head. "This conversation belongs to me." Less than an hour later, she spotted Ethan near one of his northern pastures. He was inspecting fence posts beside one of his workers, checking every rail with careful attention. She immediately noticed something that made her jaw tighten. The northern fence was perfect. Every post stood straight. Every wire looked new. Meanwhile, the southern boundary between their ranches had nearly fallen apart. She guided Willow down the slope and stopped only a few feet away. The sound of hoofbeats made Ethan turn. For the briefest moment, surprise crossed his face. Then the familiar calm returned. "Miss Carter," he said quietly. "Mr. Walker." Neither smiled. Neither looked away. "I've written to you twice. I received both letters. And yet nothing has been done." His expression barely changed. "We've been busy with spring work." "So have I." Her voice stayed calm, though frustration had been building for weeks. "While you've been busy, your cattle have eaten nearly 30 acres of my best pasture." He remained silent. "Your bulls crossed onto my land." Still nothing. "I've spent weeks cleaning up a problem that shouldn't have existed." The ranch hand standing behind Ethan suddenly found the ground extremely interesting. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I'll send someone to inspect the fence." Abby folded her arms. "I'm not asking you to inspect it." She held his eyes without hesitation. "I'm asking you to repair it." The wind moved gently across the prairie between them. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then Abby continued. "My pasture needs time to recover. Instead of money, I'd like permission to graze my cattle in your north meadow for 2 weeks this June." Ethan studied her carefully. "You've thought this through." "I always do." "You already know the north meadow isn't being used." I asked around. Something almost invisible appeared near the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Almost. Finally, he nodded once. "The fence will be repaired before the week ends." She waited. "You may use the north meadow in June." She blinked, surprised by how quickly he agreed. Then Ethan added something she never expected. "And I'm sorry about the bulls." The apology sounded genuine. No excuses. No pride. Just honesty. For reasons she could not explain, the anger she had carried all morning suddenly became much smaller. "Thank you," Abby replied quietly. She hesitated before speaking again. "I'm sorry for arriving without warning. You handled yourself well. I don't enjoy arguments." "No," Ethan said. "But you're very good at them." This time the small smile actually appeared. Only for a second. Then it disappeared again. Abby tipped her hat, turned Willow toward home, and rode away across the open prairie. She told herself she would never think about Ethan Walker again. But as the wind carried her across the hills, she found herself remembering that unexpected apology. And even more than that, she kept thinking about the man who smiled only once, yet somehow managed to leave that single smile behind with her. The fence was finished before Friday exactly as Ethan had promised. When Hank rode along the southern boundary to inspect the work, he returned wearing an expression Abby immediately recognized. It was the look of someone who had discovered something unexpected, but was still deciding how to explain it. "They replaced the whole stretch," he said as he climbed off his horse. Abby looked up from the ranch ledger spread across her kitchen table. "The whole stretch?" Hank nodded. "Not just the broken section. Every post that showed even a little rot is gone. New cedar posts, fresh wire nearly 200 yards. She stared at him. "He didn't have to do that." "No." Hank smiled beneath his gray mustache. "But he did." Abby walked out to inspect it herself that afternoon. Everything stood perfectly straight. The wire had been pulled tight enough to sing when the wind crossed it. Every corner post had been reinforced. Whoever supervised the work had treated the fence as though it were protecting his own property. She ran her hand along one of the new rails. Whatever people said about Ethan Walker, one thing was becoming clear. When he finally chose to do something, he did it properly. 2 days later, another surprise arrived. She was working in the small vegetable garden behind the ranch house, turning soil for spring planting, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drifted across the yard. Looking up, she saw Ethan riding alone. His gray stallion stepped carefully through the gate before stopping beside the garden fence. Abby brushed dirt from her gloves. "Mr. Walker, I wanted to make sure the fence met your expectations." She couldn't help smiling a little. "You rode all this way just to ask that?" He shrugged. "If it wasn't done right, I'd rather know." It was done better than right. He glanced toward the repaired boundary stretching across the distant pasture. "The old posts were weak. You could have replaced only the damaged part." "I could have. But you didn't." "No." The answer was simple. Almost matter of fact. She noticed he never tried making himself look generous. He simply did what he believed was fair. For a few moments, neither spoke. The breeze carried the smell of fresh grass through the yard, while chickens wandered lazily near the barn. "You've kept this place in good shape," Ethan finally said. "My father built it to last. You've honored his work." She looked toward the old red barn. "He taught me that land isn't something you own." "What did he say?" "You borrow it from tomorrow." Ethan looked at her with quiet surprise. "My father used to say almost the same thing." The silence that followed felt different. Less uncomfortable. More thoughtful. "You were alone after your father passed," Ethan said. "I had Hank and Mason." "I meant family." She looked down briefly. "Yes. I should have checked on you." She blinked. "You didn't know I needed help." "I should have asked anyway." The words carried real regret. She had expected a stubborn rancher. Instead, she was standing beside a man who admitted mistakes without making excuses. "I managed." "I know." He looked toward the hills. "But managing isn't always the same as having someone beside you." For reasons she couldn't explain, that sentence stayed with her long after he rode away. The first Saturday of May brought the annual gathering at Parker Ranch, the largest operation in Red Creek County. Every spring, nearly every ranching family within 20 miles gathered there to discuss cattle prices, water rights, grazing schedules, and news arriving from Cheyenne. The event also served another purpose. It gave everyone an opportunity to discuss everyone else. Abby attended every year because business depended on it. She wore her best navy blue dress, braided her hair neatly, and arrived shortly after noon. Almost immediately, Mrs. Alina Parker greeted her with an enthusiastic smile. "Abby, just the woman I hope to see." "I hope that's good news." "It depends." Mrs. Parker lowered her voice. "I hear Mr. Walker finally repaired your fence." Abby almost laughed. So you've heard. My dear, everyone has. Apparently the story had traveled through the county faster than a prairie fire. Across the yard, Abby noticed Ethan standing alone beside one of the corrals, holding a coffee cup. He looked exactly as she expected. Comfortable around horses. Completely uncomfortable around crowds. He answered polite greetings, but never lingered in conversation. Several young women attempted speaking with him. Each walked away less than a minute later. Mrs. Parker followed Abby's eyes. You know, she said casually, the North Crossing belongs to both your ranches. Abby recognized that tone immediately. So it does. You'll probably need to discuss grazing schedules. I'm sure we will. He's standing right over there. I noticed. Mrs. Parker smiled with complete innocence. I'm only thinking about business. Of course you are. Abby escaped before another suggestion could follow. She filled a small plate with biscuits and dried apples before turning around. Ethan stood only a few feet away. For one awkward second, neither spoke. Then he surprised her. Mrs. Parker sent you. Abby couldn't stop herself. She laughed. A real laugh. I believe she did. He nodded with complete seriousness. She has spent years trying to introduce me to every unmarried woman in the territory. I'm beginning to suspect that. I apologize. You don't control Mrs. Parker. No. Besides, Abby said, smiling again, she claimed we needed to discuss the North Crossing. We actually do. He pointed toward the river. The bank is beginning to wash away. She looked at him. Were you planning to mention that? I was. When? Sometime before autumn. She laughed again. I suppose that's progress. It is. For nearly half an hour, they discussed nothing except ranch business. River crossings. Grass conditions. Upcoming cattle drives. Market prices. Transport costs. The surprising number of calves born that spring. The conversation should have been boring. Instead, Abby found herself enjoying every minute. Ethan spoke carefully, choosing each word instead of filling silence for its own sake. Whenever he offered an opinion, it carried thought behind it. She respected that. Several ranchers noticed them talking. By evening, the entire gathering quietly understood something unusual had happened. Not because Ethan smiled. He still barely smiled. But because he stayed. Normally, he left conversations within minutes. This time he remained beside Abby nearly the entire afternoon. As the gathering began winding down, Ethan cleared his throat. I plan to inspect the crossing Wednesday morning. She looked at him. If you'd like to see it too. He stopped, almost embarrassed by the invitation. It'll make planning easier. I'll be there. Wednesday. Wednesday. He nodded once, then walked toward his horse. Abby watched him ride away beneath the late afternoon sun. She told herself it was simply another business meeting. Nothing more. Yet during the ride home she realized she was looking forward to Wednesday far more than any fence inspection deserved. Wednesday arrived beneath bright blue skies. Abby reached the river first. She tied Willow beneath a cottonwood tree before walking toward the crossing where spring water rushed around smooth stones. A few minutes later, Ethan appeared through the trees on the opposite bank. His gray stallion stepped confidently into the river, climbing onto her side with hardly a splash. The water's higher this year, he observed. Late snow. She pointed toward the bank. I'm more worried about that. Nearly 3 feet of soil had disappeared since autumn. Ethan crouched beside the damaged edge, scooping loose dirt into his hand before letting it fall. "We'll lose the crossing if this keeps washing away." "What would you do?" "Stone reinforcement." I was thinking the same thing. "I've got plenty of flat rock on my western hill." She raised an eyebrow. "You'd sell it." "I wasn't planning to." "What do you want for it?" "Nothing." She frowned. "Nothing. The crossing serves both ranches." He stood, dusting off his gloves. "If your bank disappears today, mine follows tomorrow." She smiled. "You're surprisingly practical." "Most problems are easier when nobody pretends they belong to only one person." Together, they spent nearly 2 hours walking along the riverbank. Somewhere during that long morning, something changed. They stopped talking only about fences. Instead, they spoke about drought years, floods, books they'd read, parents they missed, dreams they once believed impossible. Ethan even told her a story about his father's favorite bull becoming trapped in deep river mud and requiring 6 men to pull free. His voice remained serious throughout the story. Abby laughed so hard she nearly lost her balance. Ethan stopped walking. "What?" "I've forgotten what that sounded like." "What?" "Someone laughing because of something I said." She looked at him. There wasn't a trace of sadness in his voice. Only quiet honesty. For the first time, she saw beyond the lonely rancher everyone talked about. She saw a good man who had spent years convincing himself happiness belonged somewhere else. As they prepared to leave, Ethan helped her into the saddle. His hand remained only a moment. Gentle, respectful. Then he stepped back. "We'll bring the stone next week. I'll have Hank and Mason ready." He nodded. She started riding home. Halfway across the prairie, she finally admitted something she had been avoiding ever since arriving that morning. She wasn't thinking about the river anymore. She was thinking about Ethan Walker. And that realization felt far more dangerous than arguing over cattle ever had. The work along the riverbank lasted 3 full days. Just as Ethan promised, 3 wagons loaded with flat stone rolled onto the crossing early Monday morning. His 3 ranch hands worked beside him from sunrise until evening, while Hank and Mason joined from Carter Ridge. Together, they lined the banks with heavy rock, strengthening the crossing before the spring current could steal more land. Ethan never stood back giving orders. He lifted stone beside everyone else. His gloves tore. His shirt became covered with dust. His hands bled where rough rock scraped the skin. Abby noticed every bit of it. A man willing to work beside his crew instead of behind them told her everything she needed to know about his character. Each evening after the day's work ended, the others rode home first. Ethan stayed. Sometimes they sat beside the river, watching the current carry pieces of driftwood downstream. Other evenings they walked quietly along the grass without saying much at all. Neither of them hurried those conversations. They simply happened. One evening Ethan spoke about his father. Not just the facts. The memories. How his father believed every rancher should leave the land better than he found it. How he kept journals recording every calf born, every drought, every snowfall. How he believed honest work mattered more than reputation. Abby listened carefully. "So that's where you learned it." "What?" "Doing the whole job instead of only enough." A small smile appeared. "He would have complained if I cut corners." "I think my father would have liked him." "I think mine would have liked yours." The words felt strangely important. The next evening, Abby finally spoke about the winter her father died. She rarely discussed it. She described the endless snow, the silent house, the moment she realized the entire ranch now depended on her decisions. When she finished speaking, Ethan remained quiet. Then he looked toward the fading sunset. You carried it well. Only 4 words. Yet somehow they meant more than any long speech. She turned toward the river before answering, because unexpected tears had filled her eyes. Thank you. Summer arrived. Just as promised, Abby moved her cattle into Ethan's north meadow. The grass there grew thick beside the Sweetwater River, giving her southern pasture time to recover. Business required both ranch owners to inspect the grazing almost every week. At least that was the explanation they gave everyone else. Neither admitted they simply enjoyed seeing one another. Hank noticed. Walter noticed. Even Scout seemed unusually excited whenever Abby rode through the front gate. Nobody said much. They simply watched. Late one afternoon, trouble arrived. A cattle buyer named Silas Turner, who had purchased livestock from Abby for nearly 3 years, announced he was signing an agreement with a larger ranch farther north. The decision was legal, but it left Abby facing a serious loss before autumn. That evening, she sat alone at her kitchen table, surrounded by account books. No matter how she rearranged the numbers, they refused to improve. Long after sunset, someone knocked gently on the front door. She opened it. Ethan stood outside, holding his hat. I heard about Turner. She looked at him. You rode all the way here because of that. Yes. You didn't have to. I know. She stepped aside. Come in. They spread the ledgers across the kitchen table. Together, they calculated transport costs, feed expenses, market prices, expected profits. After nearly an hour, Ethan finally tapped one page. If we drive both herds to Cheyenne together this fall. He quickly penciled several figures into the margin. The transport company will lower the rate enough to replace almost everything Turner would have paid. Abby checked every number herself. They were correct. She looked across the table. That's generous. It's practical. She smiled knowingly. No. He looked up. It's kind. Silence filled the room. The lamp flickered softly between them. Finally, she spoke again. Ethan. It was the first time she had called him by his first name. He noticed. So did she. I appreciate what you're doing. He looked at her quietly. I should have come years ago. When? After your father died. She shook her head. You barely knew me. I know. He looked directly into her eyes. I wish I had. For several seconds, neither moved. Something had changed. Neither pretended otherwise. The rest of summer passed almost unnoticed. They worked together, laughed together, solved problems together. The entire county began whispering. Mrs. Parker smiled every time she saw them. I told everyone, she proudly announced one afternoon. They simply didn't believe me. Even Ethan couldn't hide his amusement anymore. One warm August afternoon, everything changed. Abby was riding toward the river crossing when she spotted Ethan's gray stallion wandering riderless across the meadow. Her heart dropped instantly. She urged Willow into a gallop. Seconds later, she found Ethan lying in tall grass nearly 30 yards away. His horse had stepped into a hidden hole. The fall had thrown him hard onto his right shoulder. I'm fine, he insisted. She knelt beside him immediately. No, you're not. I'll be all right. You can barely sit up. She carefully examined his shoulder. Nothing appeared broken, but the injury was serious. Can you ride? Yes. On Willow. My horse can wait. For once, he didn't argue. She helped him into the saddle and walked beside him all the way back to Silver Rock Ranch. Walter nearly dropped the water bucket when he saw them arrive. Within minutes, Abby had Ethan sitting comfortably inside the ranch house, while she wrapped his injured shoulder using clean cloth and cold water. She had treated enough injured ranch hands over the years to know exactly what to do. When she finished, Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you." She smiled gently. "You would have done the same." "I would. But that's not why I'm thanking you." She sat across from him. The afternoon sun poured through the windows. Outside, cattle drifted lazily across the pasture. Inside, neither could avoid the truth any longer. "Ethan." He looked directly at her. "I love you." The words came quietly, without hesitation. "I've loved you since the morning you rode onto my land demanding I repair that fence." He smiled softly. "I kept telling myself I wasn't the sort of man who wanted this anymore." He shook his head. "I was wrong." Abby's eyes filled before she could stop them. "I love you too." The words came just as naturally. "I tried convincing myself this was only friendship." She laughed through happy tears. "I wasn't very convincing." Ethan reached for her hand. She took it immediately. For the first time in 8 years, the lonely silence inside Silver Rock Ranch disappeared. Neither of them rushed toward marriage. That wasn't their way. In September, they drove both herds together to Cheyenne. Working side by side only made them more certain of what they already knew. They solved problems together, made decisions together, respected one another completely. When autumn arrived, Ethan quietly rode into town one afternoon without telling Abby why. She later discovered he had visited the only jeweler in Red Creek. He spent nearly 3 hours choosing a ring. Not because it was expensive, because it felt right. The first snowfall arrived in early November. Soft white flakes drifted across the valley when Ethan knocked on Abby's front door carrying a small wooden box inside his coat. She welcomed him inside. Coffee warmed on the stove. Snow covered the windows outside. They sat together at the kitchen table. Without saying anything dramatic, Ethan placed the small box between them. Inside rested a simple gold ring with a deep red garnet. "I chose the stone because it reminded me of your hair when the sun catches it." Abby smiled. "It isn't the diamond the ladies in Cheyenne would expect." "I'm not asking the ladies in Cheyenne." He took a slow breath. "Abby." His voice remained calm. "The whole county believes I'm a man who'll never marry." She reached across the table. "They're wrong." He smiled. "They are. I don't want another empty house." He looked at her with complete honesty. "I want mornings with you. I want evenings beside you. I want children running across these fields. I want every season that comes after this." He opened the box completely. "Will you marry me?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." She slipped the ring onto her finger herself. Then she walked around the table. He stood. Their first kiss happened while snow quietly covered the Wyoming prairie outside. Scout slept peacefully beside the front door. The coffee continued warming on the stove. By Tuesday, every person in Red Creek County knew. They married the following spring beneath bright blue skies. Both ranches gathered together. Walter cried and insisted smoke had gotten into his eyes. Hank denied wiping away tears even while everyone watched him do it. Mrs. Parker proudly claimed she had predicted everything from the very first gathering. Neither Ethan nor Abby argued. They simply smiled. The two ranches remained separate in name, but worked together every day. The old dividing fence stayed strong for years. The river crossing they rebuilt never washed away again. A year later, their first son was born. 2 years after that came a daughter. Silver Rock Ranch and Carter Ridge Ranch became known across Wyoming not only for fine cattle, but for honest people. Whenever newcomers asked how Ethan Walker, the man everyone believed would never marry, had changed his mind, the older ranchers always laughed. It wasn't romance that found him first. It was one stubborn woman who rode onto his land to argue about cattle. And everyone who knew the story agreed on one thing. Sometimes the strongest fences are not the ones built to keep people apart. Sometimes they become the very place where two lives finally come together.